Hey guys, welcome back to Can We Just Talk? Now we have two guests with us.
Yes, we have Khai and Ashrina on the show. Ashrina is my friend. Call her the female Russell Peters.
Wow.
Because she's funny.
Okay, that's a lot to live up to.
She deserves her own show.
Thank you so much again for having us. I'm really happy to be back with another pretty girl on board. I really feel like the thorn among the roses. Fantastic.
You all know Khai.
Hi, if anything, you're the rose among us thorns.
No, oh.
What's happening?
We're just flirting on air if you don't mind. You can leave the room to us after this.
Today's topic is actually pretty serious. So I'm glad we're all having a good time with the introduction. People cannot see our faces right now, but actually we are very multicultural, the lineup. So today we actually want to talk about, what are we talking about today?
It's about racism.
Yeah, we're talking about racism. Kai, did you do any research today?
No, because you know what? I think this is a topic that I hold close to my own heart. I would just like to share anecdotes as well as my own personal experience and experiences of the people around me. But I feel like when it comes to racism, it's a matter that affects closer to the heart. And I wanted to hear from all of you as well, your own personal experiences.
Maybe everyone can start by sharing an experience. Maybe Ash can start.
I think during this whole lockdown and COVID and all that, I think there's a lot of time to reflect on a lot of things. And I just realized that my first experience of racism happened like when I was 6 and I was in kindergarten, and I remember clearly exactly what happened, things that were said. And at that point, I don't understand that it's racism because I'm really young and I never told anybody. Like I didn't go home and say, Mom, this is what happened, or Dad, this is what happened. But I just kind of dealt with it. And I might have also then put a blanket on it as bullying. Like I got bullied. But is it bullying? Yes, but it's also racism in the form of bullying. And what happened was basically a minority, right? So there was only 2 of us, Indian girls, and I was told by my other classmates not to friend the other Indian girl because she was black. Maybe I'm slightly fairer, then I didn't get the same treatment, and they were friends with me. Unfortunately, at 6 years old, you don't understand, and then you think, oh, this is like bullying or whatever. To me, to admit this now is I'm like, wow, I enabled this as well because I didn't stand up for her, and I went along, and I thought about it this time, and I'm like, wow, this is absolutely crazy. But yeah, that's just one of those very vivid memories that I can remember about racism.
I personally grew up pretty okay in that I've never faced any racism growing up until I think later part, when I was an adult, and then I really understood what racism is. But what about you, Kai? Have you ever?
Wow, I have loads of stories, but with racism, there are 2 kinds, right? Like growing up back in the 90s, it was a little bit more like in your face when it comes to like applying for jobs. By the way, for those listeners of you who don't know, I am Malay and I'm Singaporean. So I am a minority, the country that I live in. So like growing up in the 90s, you hear of racism and it's really in your face. There's a lot of teasing in schools, a lot of very racial slangs that are used in school by the kids, taught to them by their parents. It never really occurred to me until like I was probably in secondary school, and it's then when you start looking at like possible careers that I realized that there are some that are just not open to me. So there were like 2 big issues back in the 90s and early 2000s. One was being non-Mandarin speakers. They would like just flat out advertise Chinese only, not even Mandarin speakers. They'd be like Chinese only. And I think the second one has a little bit more to do national security, right? I did harbor dreams of becoming an Air Force pilot. So I was in this extracurricular activity called NCCA, which were like the junior cadets, right? And I wanted to sign a bond with a military organization. Basically, it was made known to me that it'd be very hard. They didn't even have halal canteens there for us. It really dashed my dreams of becoming, a military personnel then. But I think this kind of in-your-face racism is actually a little bit easier to swallow because it's really in your face, and you go like, I'm just going to make alternate plans because certain options are not open to me, and you know what, I'll deal with that. That's life. I don't think life is always fair. It's the casual racism, I think, that gets to me in my circle of friends. And a lot of the times, a lot of casual racist comments have been made in the group, perhaps not seen as offensive because they don't really have a voice. Maybe to speak more of like current events, actually, I recently went to reserve it reservist. In my reservist, I basically assess people. And in one of the missions, somebody was simulating an explosion. While that was going on, he jokingly said, "I'm going to Allahu Akbar this person," in reference to, I guess, a terrorist act. Me as an assessor, I'm just standing there and like, is this guy serious? So I actually pulled him aside after the mission to just slowly talk to him and ask him like, hey, you know what you said? You do have Muslim colleagues with you, and imagine how they would feel. So I mean, we had a very civil conversation, and I think he understood what I was trying to say. Nobody got into trouble. But yeah, this kind of, I guess, casual racism exists, and I think that's a little bit harder to swallow because sometimes it comes from people closest to you.
It is quite interesting, that story, but I'm gonna circle back to that because I'm also very interested to hear from Pauline, because if you don't know, Khai is from Singapore. It's a very multi-racial nation. Ash and myself from Malaysia, we have like many races together, like living together in the country. But Pauline is from the Philippines, and there is only, I guess, Filipinos, right? One race, one nation. I want to know, have you ever felt or dealt with racism yourself?
Okay, I think for me, I don't experience any racism back then when I was still very young, since I'm still young. But in my experience, I feel like sometimes we Filipinos also experience same racism with our own. You get it? Because in the Philippines, even though you are Filipino, you still have someone from Bulacan. Those are the ones who live in the provinces.
Right.
And then there are those people who live in Manila. Everyone got all the technologies and everything.
Is it more like a caste thing, more like if you are rich or poor?
Yeah. But I mean, in general, like racism, I do actually experience that one, but when I was already working. Then when I work internationally, even if I ask someone to help me, they will not give me the same attention as they give to these white people. Let's admit it. In the Philippines, if you are white, everyone sees you like a higher level. You're in a higher position.
I think it's not just the Philippines. I think it's a general stigma in Asia that I think it's not even in Asia, right? Even in the States, they are white privileges where if you are black or any other race, you're just not as important as...
Yeah, I think the term for it is that we're suffering what we call the post-colonial hang-up, right? Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up because I think it is an issue that most countries in ASEAN suffer from, actually.
Talking about the jokes and stuff like that, because earlier on Khai mentioned racist jokes. I am kind of guilty of that, and that's why I find it very interesting when Khai brought up. Obviously, there are certain situations where a joke can be a bit serious, but where do we draw the line?
Okay, I've always heard this thing where if you're racist towards your own race, it's fine. Like if you make a racist joke when it's your own race, it's okay, it's fine because you're basically making fun of yourself, right? But when it's another race, then is when you've got to be careful. That's why, I mean, me and Tammy, we always say this, and she's like, "Hey, you're very bad." I'm like, "Hey, I'm Indian, I can say it. Okay, it's fine." I don't know if that is then enabling,
But that's the thing, because when Ash makes fun of the Indians, I get the impression like, oh, it's cool too. Because then
oh my God, no.
Because the Indian really accept what they, she also accepts what it is, right? But it sounds like that.
I mean, every culture has its little things that make that culture
Stereotypes.
unique. Not to say maybe stereotypes, but also there's certain, cultural things.
I call it cultural quirks.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
No
So
problem.
with that, I think if we stop, if we are so careful about, not making fun and being very, it also takes away a certain lightheartedness in just like not poking fun to hurt, but if you can laugh at each other's quirks, then it's okay, but when you take it a bit far, so where do you draw the line? It's very hard.
So the thing is that, yes, I believe in life, you cannot take yourself too seriously. You must be able to laugh at yourself. And I do agree that some jokes are funny. There's this joke about Malay people in Singapore, and I love to use this, about how we're terrible at math. And it's hilarious because most recently I had a friend, we were just chatting in a group, and he said like, hey, like I was born in March and my wife was born in March, so they wanted a baby in between their birthdays. And he was like, yeah, but like I got the date right, but my baby was born in January. What month do I procreate to get a baby in March? And I was like, my goodness, dude, you just -9. So June, his child is now been born in January and in the wrong month because he can't math. And I just kept rolling and laughing on the floor at him.
Is your friend Malay?
Yes,
Oh.
that's what makes it funnier. So I completely agree. Like there are certain things that is not mean spirited, I feel.
Exactly.
But I think where you draw the line is if let's say somebody says, I do feel hurt that you're saying this, I think you immediately say like, hey, you know what, I'm sorry. Then I draw the line here, right? I never meant it's just lightheartedness. No one's meaning to hurt any feelings here. And because of that, I feel like different people's thresholds are different. In different situations also that line changes. It's sad to say, like, there is a social hierarchy amongst most groups, right? And if this person gets constantly picked on because of his race, then I think that's mean. Just don't cross the line by being mean-spirited. Don't be malicious. And if let's say the person says, hey, this does hurt my feelings, then you should acknowledge that.
Like, name calling?
Yeah.
Like everyone has a name for a certain race that they would call. I really feel upset with the name calling, being labeled that. It just goes straight into the heart. And I agree, because you're tired from fighting this, I would just keep quiet and remove myself from a situation, and I'm like, oh, I'm done. And then people will look at you and be like, oh, what's wrong? That one hurts.
Whoever calls me Amoy, I tell you. Amoy. Have you heard this, Pauline? Amoy is the term for Chinese. I don't like it.
What does that mean?
Chinese girl. What names have you been called?
It's really funny because I have this friend who just has never had a Malay friend in his entire life, which is amazing considering that he's grown up in Singapore. But I do realize, right, that there is a group Chinese elites who have grown up never seeing a Malay person in their entire lives because they go through like the whole elite school system and there are really no Malays in that system. Then they go into their adult lives, into the workplace, and then they meet brown people. And they're like the people of myth and legends, and they're so unfamiliar with our customs and
So
traditions.
sorry. What do you mean by brown people?
Me. I meant me.
Does this include Indians now?
Okay, the thing
Yes,
is,
it does.
It does, yes.
It does.
Of course, you are also, but yeah, when they see Malays, for the first time, they're just very unfamiliar with our ways. I see it as my job to kind of then be my race's representative to just educate them slowly and patiently about, our ways. But yeah, I have this friend who for 2 straight years insisted on calling me brown bro. And I was like, dude, I have a freaking name. And I'm like, that's racist as hell. And
Maybe that person think it's cool.
yeah, so this is the thing.
Yeah.
I told him like, hey, it's not cool, and he insisted on calling me that because he didn't think it was hurtful. So I started calling him Yellow Snow just to annoy him. But yeah, I think I got my point across because he stopped calling me brown bro now. At the height of the whole Osama thing, like I've been called terrorist numerous times.
Really?
They were like, hey, you're terrorist. Worse in school, I've been like, I've heard people say like, oh, your father's a terrorist. Wow. Like, okay. There's a huge personal attack, and I think that's mean.
One story, because now that I'm thinking about it, I was 10 and I was going to buy school shoes because school was going to start. I was trying on the shoe and I just heard this little kid, probably younger than 5, and he says, Budak keling, budak, right? And I'm like, trying on my shoes and I'm looking around like, who's he calling? And then I realized it's directed to me and my dad is just looking at me and I'm like, wow, it's very hard. But my dad didn't say anything, neither did the kid's parents. They didn't stop it. After when we bought the shoe and I'm looking at my dad, I'm like, okay, he's not addressing it either. And I think as parents, it's very difficult when you actually witness your child going through a racist situation. And I don't blame my dad for not saying anything about it. But of course, later on, we did speak about it.
And Ash, I have to be fairly honest. I think in the playground, I guess when I was in primary school, the culling thing was very common. And I think I was partially guilty. But I think further down the road, when I was a teenager in secondary school and just beyond that, I happened to mix with a lot of Indian people as well. And I was educated a little bit more on why that actually is very offensive.
A lot of people who are not within this culture, they won't know what culling is, right?
Yeah,
Keling. Khai would be explaining now.
Yes. So I think the history of it is basically how Indian people have always worn bangles, jewelry, and like anklets. When they walk, they make that sound. Ever since then, as a racist slang, people have gone like that curling because of that clinking sound that it makes when the anklets made by the anklets when they walk by and things like that. So it became a very derogatory term for like Indian people.
The other thing that was linked towards the word was also empire, Kalinga. Can't remember right now, but Kalinga I remember, and it meant something very. I think it was not derogatory. In time, it became derogatory. So
Yeah, yes.
so that is why it's just not something that you want to be. You want to hear. So as that happens, it gets adapted to then different languages. Yeah.
Listening to the stories, I just feel like I'm kind of blessed in that I've never really experienced racism at all growing up. Even when I was in Liverpool, I think my friends, they were telling stories like how the white people actually stopped their car and called them yellow because we're Chinese. Actually, when I was in Liverpool, I experienced none of that. In fact,
what about traveling?
Yeah, when we were traveling that time to Europe, it was the first time I experienced something.
Yes, that one. I remember the incident. I was like,
I think the girl said something like F you in my face. I didn't even know that because I don't know how to read sign language. How was it again?
We were in Amsterdam and we were on the tram and we were on our way, I think, back to the hotel. And then someone taps me on the shoulder from the other side and says, "Hey, are those your friends?" So I look up and I see like this gesture towards Tammy sitting by the window and towards the window. So I was like, huh? So I told the guy, I said, no, they're not. Then he's like, oh, okay, because they just like kind of, showed your friend the middle finger. So I was like, what? I felt very bad. It's never a nice experience to go through. And I was like, what did you do to deserve that nonsense?
Actually, we did nothing.
I'm going to call it nonsense because
it is.
So you mean for no reason?
No reason at all. We're just riding the train, and I remember there was a knock on the window, but
she knocked on the window. I thought she wanted to tell me something like
that's extra, to knock on the window to actually mean it.
And then to get your attention for you guys.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right.
Well, actually, she failed because I didn't really know what she said until the guy tapped.
Until the guy, right? Yes, exactly. And I was like, "What's going on?"
Message not received. But even that tiny bit of racism, I would say there's a bit of fear. Then I think back on all the movies I watched about the slaves back in the day, and I feel even more sad for them in that sense. Like, can you imagine? There's nothing you can do about it. Right now, we can talk about it. We can actually, if you want to stand up, we can stand up and tell your friends, say, yo, that was rude, things like that.
You know what? If it came from a random stranger, I'd just be like, yeah, whatever. To me, actually, what hurts most is like when it's your friends, who think otherwise. Sadly, racism does exist like everywhere. I think my own race has its own thing going on against other races, especially like the older generation. They believe in stereotypes. I'm blessed that I grew up in a multicultural environment and that most of my friends came from outside my own race. A lot of times I've been treated with kindness, and I see that we're all just people underneath whatever skin color that we have on us. In fact, for most people that don't know, my paternal grandfather is Chinese, so when I was growing up, I looked very Chinese, and I was in a Muslim school, a madrasa. So I was highly bullied when I was in nursery and K1. It was so bad that my parents had to transfer me out. I experienced what it's like to be on both ends. Racism by looking Chinese and also racism from my other races because of my identity as a Malay Muslim person.
I have an interesting question to ask. Like, what if you're discriminated by your own race?
Actually, the Philippines, it might happen a lot. I just want for you guys to know that usually a lot of Filipinas, they have a boyfriend or a husband, white man. So a lot of people are going to say, oh my gosh, this person, she don't love this guy. She just want to take the money. It's like a gold digger.
Interesting, because this is what the Filipinos told me. Like, they say, oh, the girl wants a white guy because she wants to get rich. This is what your people tell me.
Oh, wow.
Right? A lot of people. And then also, I just want to explain that there's a dating show. It's like an engagement. It's like 100 days. Then you are going to get engaged.
100 Day Fiance.
Yes. That's it. So this Filipina got really famous because of it. Let's admit it. She really don't like the guy. So that one, you see, it's an international show where a lot of people are watching. And now every time got a Filipina who's partnered with a white guy or any racist, their family is going to say no. She just wants your money.
I think especially if even people who have not been to the Philippines then would have this idea that these
Yes.
are what Filipino girls are like. They're only gonna,
Kai became very quiet.
Kai's like, what kind of nonsense is this?
No. I'm just listening in.
When Ash asked that question, the Indians are the most famous for racism against their own kind.
Yes, solely because I think when I was in high school, so I was basically 12, finished primary school. I had friends who were Chinese, Malay, it was fine. And I literally had, friends of all colors, shapes, sizes, whatever. January, I start high school.
Yeah.
I come in and I go to the main hall and I am shocked. And it was just very evident that there were sections and that you just go to your section. So I wanted to go and see my friend, and both of us looked at each other. We're like, oh my God, like we have been separated by this little invisible force of saying, no, you cannot mix. Even in the school canteen, it's the same thing. The last 3 rows of the canteen at the back was all the Indians and whoever, the Chinese were all together and the Indians were all together. Me not being able to speak Tamil, I was basically hung out to dry. So neither could I go to my friend who's Malay. And then the Chinese all speak in Mandarin or Cantonese. And you're like, okay, I don't understand any of this. You go to the Indians, and of course I understand what they're saying. It's just that I can't speak because my fault. I didn't learn my own language, but I used to watch a lot of like movies or whatever, so I could understand. So while they talk, I can't answer. And they used to call me, she thinks she's white. Like, oh, look at this whitey. And I understand. And so I'm like, oh God, like I'm being called white. Secondary school was just horrible for me, but you learn to adapt.
You know what? Beyond just friendship, I've never thought about race when I was dating, which has then gotten me into trouble, especially with my parents. But I don't think you should limit yourself, right, in terms of friendships and also love. And I've learned so much beyond their cultures, and you learn so many things and why they do things the way they do, and like pick up on their strengths. It's not like really a stereotype, but in Singapore, I do find that a lot of my Chinese friends are more exposed to financial wisdom. I feel like I learned a lot by being around them. Like my own family, we never thought about investments, insurance. Money is just not a priority where I come from. I've always heard Malay people say is this world is temporary and like you should be content with what you have. And I think it's a great trait to have. But also, there's no reason why you shouldn't be financially wiser. And I picked that up from my Chinese friends and their parents. Generally, I feel I am a better person because I have such a wide range of friends, and I like to think that I bring the same thing to the table for them because then they get exposed to me and my culture as well. If you limit yourself, essentially it's you that's losing out.
There are also good stereotypes. Certain races, we feel like the Malays, they are very kind-hearted. They really don't care much about themselves. This is one thing my sister say, right? There was an accident. The Chinese ain't gonna stop and help you. It's the Malays who will stop by the roadside and help the person. Chinese will be rushing to the work. These are traits from another culture that we learn.
I'm so sorry I have to interject this because I went reservist recently, right? And it's a mixed group now. Okay, and we were having a meal, and one of the Chinese people said, do you notice, right, like whenever you go to a Muslim or Malay coffee shop, there are a lot of less fortunate people who often sell tissue there. But if you go to like a Chinese coffee shop, don't have. And it's a Chinese guy that said it. Then I was like, huh? Because I don't eat at Chinese coffee shops, so I wouldn't know, right? And so yeah, he said like, I think Malay people are just softer lah. Like you saying this just kept this big memory thing just kind of popped out in my head, and I was like, yeah, okay, I can live with that. That's a nice thing for you to say.
Yeah, it's true. That's why stereotypes can be good also,
Yeah.
I think they have a very strong sense of community, which is very nice sometimes, Everyone helps each other. You don't really necessarily see that with maybe any other race, I think.
When we talk about all this, I think when we first started, the whole like negative experiences that we've had, I just want to add, I think I mentioned earlier that I am a product of biracial. I mean, my grandfather is Chinese, I mentioned, my paternal grandfather. Honestly, if not for races coming together, helping each other, I wouldn't exist today because my grandfather was actually Chinese Indonesian, and he was basically knowledgeable in naval engineering. When the Japanese captured him in Indonesia, he basically was forced to work on their warship, which parked itself in Singapore, and he ran away and hid in a Malay kampung. So what happened was they just kind of like took him in, married him off to an orphan, which is my grandma, and like just basically disguised him as a Malay man, and that's how they kept him safe during the Japanese occupation. And it goes to show, like, when you look beyond the race, you can work together and achieve unbelievable things. difference. Again, I wouldn't exist if not for the fact that people putting aside their differences to be graceful and kind to each other.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. But I guess people who have experienced racism, they would think like, yo, because you're very privileged, you haven't really gone through the pain, I guess, the pain in this generation where we are more blessed and luckier. Because right now, racism is maybe still serious in certain aspect or certain countries, but as a whole, we don't feel so much of the negative side of things. Maybe for my parents or the generation maybe for them, sometimes when we speak to my parents, there's like that anger that I don't know about you if you feel that too, Ashrina, but like my parents, maybe because my dad has been deprived of certain opportunities, there is something that you feel like it is that unfairness which we initially talked about, and that gets to you. Like if I were a certain race, then I would have gotten that spot in the university. And the good news is I also feel we have all improved since back in the days.
Yeah, I also believe that now a lot of people knows how to stand. I mean, speak for themselves. Unlike before, they cannot because a lot of people now are educated about what racism is.
Yes, 100%. At least we have a voice now, like in the US last year.
George Floyd.
Yes, George Floyd, almost say Washington.
So,
I'm quite a bimbo sometimes. I'm so sorry.
The thing is that we have to then continue to educate ourselves that, what is acceptable, where there's a line draw, being sensitive towards people's feelings. I do feel that racism will continue to exist. It will never go away, unfortunately, just because of we are a product of our environment. All that I think will only stop if we are all then on the same page and say, look, we can't do this or we can't do that. But also then I'm thinking in that same vein is how much of censorship then is needed. The good and the bad, it does color your life differently. It teaches you things, not encouraging it by any means, but I'm just saying these experiences will then shape you and all that. So how much do we censor? Then you have a very sterile experience of life. What does that happen then? What does that mean for us?
Actually, if you want to talk about this, we can talk for days, But I got one question, like, I don't know, I've asked, like, do you think intercultural marriages will solve this problem? Something to think about.
Yeah.
Personally, I think it might help, if everyone is all mingled, there's like only one single race, Pauline will be not 100% Filipino. Ash will not be 100% Indian. Khai is already mixed. I probably have some Japanese blood. I don't even know.
Yeah.
Actually, we are all mixed in a certain ways, right?
Yeah.
yeah, I think if we are going to trace, for sure.
Yes. I think that would be very interesting though, to actually get your genealogy done. Maybe you're not fully Chinese after all, Tammy.
I mean, here in the Philippines, a lot of other countries went here and then. So if you are going to trace it, our last names were from Spanish.
But I just wanted to add to me about interracial marriages. Will they solve it? Yeah, please forward any applicants to me.
Ash.
Wow.
I completely support interracial
Actually, I thought
marriage.
you all hit it off pretty well until we came in and disturbed you. Like, Pauline and I shouldn't even be on the show today. Why are we here?
Yeah.
If they
Yeah, yeah.
succeed, if they are another success story. Basically, Kai's my guinea pig. I'm just basically matchmaking Kai to every single girl I know.
Can I just say something? You have a lot of guinea pigs, don't you?
I actually do. Anyway,
Yeah.
when Kai comes to KL, we will all meet up for drinks.
Yes. Let's do that.
Ash is the only Indian who cannot drink. You have to meet her.
It's like a Filipino that cannot sing.
Oh!
Yes.
A Chinese person that can't count, and a Malay person that can't play the guitar, maybe.
A lot of stereotype came up. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank
Thank you
you.
for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
And thank you for putting me on the same discussion with Ash.
Okay.
So cute.
Okay, guys.
Don't worry about it. We'll do it again someday.
Yeah, we'll do it
Yes,
again.
yes.
You guys.
Thanks a lot. Nice meeting you guys.
Nice
Thank you.
meeting you. Good night.
Good
Bye.
night.